everyone, it's Mrs. Behrens. I have your science lesson for Tuesday, October 27th. The materials you will need today are your science notebook and a pencil. And our learning targets are, I can recall information I have read about a topic. I can use information and observations to compare and contrast two organisms. And I can explain my thinking in writing. What we are going to do today for science is to focus on our science notebook entry. Remember to always date your entry on the top and title your entry. The title for today is Comparing Parts of an Ecosystem. Once you have your science notebook page dated and titled, we are going to create a table that we will use to compare and contrast animals and plants within the ecosystems we have built. I am first going to model what it looks like to compare and contrast two plants. Then you will move on and compare and contrast two animals on your own. First, I'm going to set up a table that I will use to organize my information. I am going to draw a table that takes up the top half of my notebook page. And I'm going to put one line across and one line down. On the top of this table, I am going to list the two plants that I want to compare and contrast. The plants that I have chosen are ryegrass from the terrarium and green algae from the aquarium. Down the left-hand side of the table, I am going to write similar and different. In my table, I am going to use these boxes to explain how ryegrass and green algae are both similar and different from each other. Your job will be to follow along and copy this table into your science notebook. Pause the video now if you need to set up your table further. Once you have your table set up, we will begin to compare and contrast these two organisms. I have asked myself a few different questions. I'm thinking about what ryegrass and algae need to live, how large or how small they are, what type of habitat they live in, what they provide for their ecosystem, how they get their food, etc. Some examples that I have observed in the ecosystem and also read in articles that we have read prior to this lesson are as follows. A few of the similarities that I have come up with are ryegrass and green algae are both green. Another similarity is that ryegrass and green algae are both a food source for other organisms in their ecosystem. I know that mosquito fish and snails eat green algae, and I know that crickets eat ryegrass. Another similarity between ryegrass and green algae is that they are both producers. That means that they can make their own food. And because they are producers, I remember from the article that that means they do photosynthesis. They make their own food out of sunlight and carbon dioxide. So these are some examples that I have thought of that are similarities between ryegrass and green algae. Now I'm going to move on to the second part of my table. And in this part, I will be recording examples that I think of that show differences between ryegrass and green algae. Some examples that I have observed and that I remember from our articles are that ryegrass and green algae are a very different size. When I looked at the picture of the ecosystem, I saw that ryegrass was about 6 inches tall. It has grown a lot in these last couple of weeks. And I know that green algae is actually so small you can't see it. So I know that their size is a big difference. Another difference between ryegrass and green algae is that ryegrass has roots. And green algae does not have roots. Another difference between ryegrass and green algae is that they have different habitats. Ryegrass grows on land, and green algae grows in the water. Now this table is displaying information that I know about the similarities and the differences between ryegrass and green algae. Your job to finish your science notebook entry for today is to complete the same table for 2 different animals in our ecosystem. Follow along as I set up the table. You will draw another large rectangle in your notebook, like this. Draw a line down the middle and a line across. In the top boxes, you will write similarities. In the bottom, you will write differences. Now this is where you get to have a choice. You get to choose one of the animals that we have in our terrarium. Remember, that means you can choose the isopod or the cricket. And on the right-hand side, you will choose one of the animals that we have in our aquarium. That means you can choose the mosquito fish or the snail. Do some observing and some thinking about the articles that we have read to come up with similarities and differences between the animal you choose from the terrarium and the animal you choose from the aquarium. Once you have filled in each of the boxes in your table, take a picture of your science notebook entry and submit it to Schoology.